Hi all, thank you for joining. Today we'll take a look at the presentation titled Harnessing the Power of Creo Industrial Design, specifically with Freestyle and the Design Exploration Extension. So thank you all for joining today. So the agenda is simply to talk about what is Creo Freestyle, what is the Design Exploration Extension, and then we'll go into a demo. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Bill. I have experience in ID, and I've been a technical specialist at PDSVISION for 3 years, but in total about 6. There's a nice picture of my son and I at Walt Disney World. And please excuse me, I've been sick, so if my voice sounds a little strange, that's why. Okay, so what is Creo Freestyle? Creo Freestyle is a subdivision modeling tool that allows you to create high quality surfaces quickly. And that's the main point that I want to drive home here is how quickly you can create multiple versions that are high quality product iterations that you can go back and forth between before you kind of finalize your final product design. Creo Freestyle allows you to quickly create these iterations to review with your design team, your engineering team, and your managers. The surfaces are modified through your control mesh, so we'll take a look at that in the demo. And what's really nice about it is it allows you to sculpt in a similar way as you would with clay. So a lot of pushing and pulling. So it really gives you kind of almost in this interesting way, this tactile feel for modeling. Benefits of Freestyle, increased productivity and efficiency, increased quality of product styling and innovation. The products look better when you're designing in Freestyle just because of the ease of use of the tool. And that eventually gets you to sell better and get to the market faster. It also increases competitive differentiation. So what differentiates you from your competitors? And that, of course, if you're in product design, a lot of times is your aesthetic and your ergonomics, and Freestyle is great for that. Eliminates the need for third-party industrial design software. This is another big one that we wanted to focus on. We hear a lot of people using, third-party design tools, whether it's Alias, Blender 3D, Maya. Those tools are great, but when it comes to engineers that are working inside of Creo, if we can stay within that PTC thread of products, it's a lot easier for the data transfer and the ability, the ease of use and the usability of the surfaces if you can stay within Creo. So, all right, so here's a nice sheet that talks about some companies that are using both Freestyle and ISDX, and you can see here that the benefits are striking. So we have a 20 to 25% time saving for Whirlpool Corporation using Freestyle and ISDX for their industrial design, and that's a common thread if you look up that column. Just a huge time savings, and the exploration of design that Freestyle gives you is paramount because we know that the more time you're spending on one iteration of a design is the time that you're missing out on potential others that are better, right? So the idea is to create multiple iterations of a product so that you have more to choose from, and then in the end, that allows you to choose the best. Design exploration extension. It enables quick and easy investigation of alternative concept designs within the parametric environment, eliminates the need to save multiple files for different versions of a design, and that's the really big one where a lot of people are used to when they're developing a product and they're creating these concepts is, we have concept 1, save, right? Concept 2, save as, right? And before you know it, you may have 10 to 20, if not more, files saved of the different versions of that concept. Whereas with DEX, you have an actual checkpoint tree where you can save multiple versions of that product along that evolutionary timeline, and you can actually branch off. So if you have 4 versions in your checkpoint tree that you really like, and you want to explore those, you can branch off in each one. So we'll talk about that. It's very fluid and easy to use. Some of the benefits: you can explore design changes safely without risking original designs or committing to any change. Simultaneously develop different ideas and evaluate all options before making a choice. Effortlessly switch back and forth between design ideas. So that flexibility of being able to work in one environment and go back and forth between your different design ideas benefits the engineer and the designer, because they don't have to open files, search for files, that compare designs. You can do it all within one session. All right. Okay, so let's go right into the demo. So the first thing I want to talk about, and we'll go to Creo here. Okay, so you can see that I kind of already have this design exploration tree set up. So we have the typical model tree here to the left. So there's the aircraft. I have my freestyle mesh here, and I had different checkpoints, and we will explore those. To create your design exploration session, you can go to File, Manage Session, and then Design Exploration Session, and then do Start, and then you can start your session there. All right. So we're going to focus on freestyle here first. And one thing I wanted to talk about here is bringing in a reference image to use when sculpting your product. So if I go back in time here a little bit, let's go to checkpoint 2 and activate that checkpoint. All right, so we're here. You can see that I have some images on the right and front plane of this jet. Now I'm going to go into my freestyle 1, and I can hide the shape. And the reason why I'm going to hide it is I want to show you that I'm using this right view of the jet and this top view as a reference. Right now, the question is, how did I do that? So I can show that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click OK. All right, and if you go to your View tab, go to the images here, you can see that we have the ability to bring in an image. So what I had to do was basically turn on my planes, or if you want to, you can just select right from the model tree, right? So I would say import an image, and I would have to select the plane to place that image on. So in this case, I would select that right plane, then I would browse for that image, and it would come in on that plane, right? So what I can do, and to show an example, is maybe I'll just go in here and I'll hide the side view like that. All right, and then what I can do is I can go to import, I can grab that right plane, and I'm just going to go in here to my directory, and it looks like it's right here. There's my side view. Great. So here it is. And what's nice is I can scale this, rotate it. If I want to snap to make sure it's 90 degrees, I can hold Shift and snap in increments there. And I can drag that down, right, and kind of scale it and get it where I want. Okay, so that's the quick and easy of it. If you guys want to learn more about this after the presentation, you can send me an email. We can talk about that, but that's the gist of it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that one and turn on this one that's hidden, like that. Okay, and so one thing that I like to show, which is kind of nice, is that I did use a couple tools to do my sketches. So I used Procreate, which is an application that can be used on the iPad for drawing, sketching, painting. And I also used an application called Inkscape, which is down here. So this application allows me to create a vector image based on the sketches that I imported. So I have my original sketch behind here, and I could hide all these, right, so you can see it better. But start off with my original sketch, and I got my different paths here that I can use to change the shape. So you use pen tools, these little nodes, kind of like you would in Sketcher when you're creating splines. It also has these little nodes that you can select to move around. But this is the tool that I used, and I exported these as PNGs with a transparent, with a transparent background. And then that's what I imported onto those planes inside of Creo. Okay. All right, so you can see that we can easily skip between the different checkpoints on the tree, and this is very powerful, right? So I started off with this first one, and I ended up with checkpoint 23 down here. So what's nice is I can actually right-click along the timeline, and I can activate the different checkpoints. You'll say the models were modified since active checkpoint. Modifications will be lost. The modifications that I made weren't very important, so I'm not concerned if they're lost or not. So I'll click OK. And then there's that point. So you can see the evolution of this, jet from my sculpting, as you activate these checkpoints here. I'll kind of skip down the line here. All right. Okay, great. All right, and also one thing to point out that I think is important as well is the KeyShot plugin within Creo. So Creo also has a very strong rendering tool, which is the Render Studio, and the Render Studio actually uses the KeyShot engine. But I do have a seat of KeyShot, so it only makes sense for me to use that. So what's nice is I can show you, this is a render of the jet right now in KeyShot right here. And what's great is, and I'll show this a little bit later, because I have this plugin, if I make any changes to this model, all I have to do is select the model here and go to update, and it'll do a live update of my changes to KeyShot straight from Creo. So that handoff, that relationship or the association between Creo with the plugin to the KeyShot is very powerful, because you need to be able to add materials and colors to your product to experiment and to really see how it's going to look with a real lighting environment. And the ability to do that live is important. Okay, so I'm just going to go back here to the checkpoint 2, because I kind of want to show you how to get started with Freestyle here. All right, and I'll go into my Freestyle mode here and hide this mesh. Okay, so I really have a good starting point here with, excuse me, with the right view and this top view. I could have also brought in a front view and a back view if I needed to, but I think that this was good enough to start with. So there's multiple ways to start sculpting in this tool. You're going to use a primitive shape. So if you go over here to the shapes tool, you can see that we have open primitives. So these aren't closed, right? So there's planes, triangle, there's sphere, there's cylinder, torus, there's the cube, right? So, one way, for example, could be to start with a sphere, right? And I can position the sphere where I want it. I can select a surface and I can extrude that surface like this, right? And I can start to tweak it a little bit so I can try to get the curvature, of that plane by tweaking the vertices and the edges and moving them. What's nice too is, we also have the mirror tool. So we know that we'll save a ton of time using that mirror tool, because we only have to modify one side or design on one side. So to do that, I would grab one side of that mesh, use the mirror feature, mirror about the correct plane, and then from here, right, I can start coming in here and sculpting. So I can grab these points and move those up. I can move these down You can see how easy it is to just box select the vertices or the faces and the edges, right? Start pulling those up, tweaking those. I can pull this out further, select these points. So I'll just pause here for a minute, and you guys know that if you're using traditional ways of surfacing, which are first creating your datum curves and using the boundary blend tool to create patches, or even an ISDX, they have their own curves and surfaces that you can use for your patching in there. It takes a lot longer even just to create a surface like this than we're doing here in Freestyle, because you have to lay out a network of curves first and then create your surfaces between those. Whereas with here, it's basically doing some work for us, right? So I can further sculpt the shape. Maybe I'm going to bring that down a little bit to get that curvature. So I grab that edge, I can grab a vertex here and bring that down. I'm going to have to bring this in to get the nose there of that plane. Right now we can see in some areas we actually need more geometry, so it kind of thickens in this area, right? So I can actually add more geometry. I can select that edge and I can right click and I can say, let's do a subdivision, let's split and add more geometry, right? So there's more geometry that I just added that I can adjust, right? So I can move some of these out and I can grab that, bring that out. Now I want these to be clean, right? So, and what I mean by that is we have an edge here that's vertical and this one is at an angle. We don't really want that. That's not good topology, as they call it. So I want to make sure that I clean this up to make sure that it's clean topology here. Right? And I'll drop this down further a little bit. Okay. And then here, we can see I added more geometry and that changed the whole mesh. So what I'm going to do is readjust some of this. I'm going to pull these vertices up like that. All right. Maybe add some geometry here as well. There's my split. I can lift these points up. And it's really just amazing. It's mind-blowing how quickly I can start creating a very high quality mesh. Like that. And that's pretty good. I may even want to add more geometry here. So I'm going to grab that edge and I'll split it with one edge loop like that. Then I'm going to have to pull this back a little bit and then out. And we kind of have a hump there that's too severe. So what I can do is just grab an edge, for example, start to round that out, or a vertex and round that out a little bit, right? So you guys are probably saying, oh, you make this look so easy because you use the tool, and there's some truth to that, but I really believe that with our team, myself, we also have a guy, Keith Morris at PDSVISION, that knows sculpting and freestyle as well, and maybe some others. I'm not sure if there's somebody else that uses that tool or uses this tool at PDS, but there, let's bump that down a bit. Let's add some geometry here so I can start to tweak this design. Okay. All right. And now you can see that, we got started, right? And we may even want to start to work on, like the wing, for example, right? So there's multiple ways to do that. One way would be just to select some of the faces that we have here, for example. Maybe it's just these for now. And we can do an extrusion like this. I can shift this whole thing over. And then basically from here, right, just start to grab the edges and the faces and the vertices to shape the wing. Right. I can also add an extrude here, like that. All right. So you can see that right now it's very primitive. It doesn't look like the final result that you guys saw from my plane, and that's just because it just takes time, right? It takes a lot of time to sculpt, but it takes less time than it would to create this jet with the typical surfacing tools in Creo. I'm going to take this and move that out. Take this guy and pull it in. You can see I'm using the image on that top plane to shape this. All right, so we can see that this wing is too thick, right? So we can easily, I can grab these top surfaces now. And what's nice is if I hold shift down, I can select multiple parts of this wing at once. I can kind of just lower those, right? See that? If I want, I can just grab one point or a vertice and adjust that size. So you can see that I'm doing this live with really no planning. And the idea is that you guys can see how quickly you can start to get, these shapes. And then also we have that stabilizer on the back, right? So what I can do is, it's going to split off here and here. So I may subdivide this area again too. Like that, maybe once more. And then now what I can do is I can grab, do multiple surfaces. Let's grab that face and extrude. Rotate. So far as translating and moving the control mesh around, whether it's the vertices, points, or faces, I've been using the arrows. But if you need to rotate a face or an edge, for example, you can do that as well with a ring like that. Okay. I think I'm going to take this edge here, move that out a bit, down. All right. Then maybe I'll lift these edges up a bit, like that. And then select the face, and I want it to kind of have these flare out a bit, so I'll move that. Click extrude. And we can also scale, right? So you can see that, one way to scale is just to grab an edge like that and move it down, right? But say, for example, that, I wanted to scale this whole face. I can select that face, right click, and I can go to the scale tool And I can scale in a specific plane. I could scale that whole face like that, for example. I could scale just in this direction if I wanted to. I'm going to go back to translate and just eyeball it here. And I think I don't want to extend and make the wing that long. It's nice to have a reference image, but that doesn't mean that that's exactly the route that you're going to go. So maybe I'll just do this and bring this edge up or something. And I can also move that whole face again like that. Right, so it's pretty amazing how quickly, right, I can start to sculpt this thing. You can see that, it's going to need more work in the front because I added more faces here and I have the exact curvature that I want, but just like anything else, that'll just take some time for me coming in here and cleaning that up. And also, we don't have to have geometry in all places. So even though I, split the mesh here and that line control all the way down, I could have limited where that line ended so that I didn't get more geometry on the nose, because I may not need all this geometry to define the nose. I can tell you that for my design I really don't, but I can also grab these and pull that out. All right, start to round that off a little bit more. Yeah, great. And then I can also merge or connect some of the geometry here. So I'm going to actually split this edge and add more polygons, and maybe on the wing here as well. And then I'm going to connect this face with this face. So let's do a connect, and there it is. See how I connected those together? Because I want to create an intake for the engine. So this is one way of doing that, and I could take this whole face now and move that out. I can also connect these. I can grab these faces here and say connect. So now I'm creating that intake, right? And say I want to actually create the opening for the intake, right? So this is at the wrong angle. So I'm going to rotate that like this so it makes more sense. Well, now I can go in here and grab that surface and I can create an inset. That's a little bit too much. Do this. All right. And then I can create a recess to start to concept that out, for example, and see how that's going to look. And then the same thing back here. Let me add another subdivision here. And I'm going to connect this face, and this face. And we'll exit here. All right. You can also adjust the orientation of your translation arrows. So, say for example, you're like, hey, if I select this arrow and I extrude inside of this, will be at the wrong angle. You can actually right click here and say reposition. And then you can reposition where your arrow is and then uncheck the reposition box. And then you can do your extrusion, for example, in that direction. So let's go ahead and I'm going to take that back here, reposition. Right? So we can actually see that we've started to create a pretty cool plane here pretty quickly. Right? So that's using this method. Now, if I hide this, I use a sphere that time. I also could have used a cube and in a similar way sculpted that shape, right? Where I'm first probably going to go to scale down this cube, and then reposition it to a point where I feel I can get started pretty cleanly here. So I would kind of maybe, start there, for example, and then move that face down. And then in the same way, I'm going to mirror. So I'll select the vertices on this side and then mirror using my right plane, and then start sculpting this, right? So I'll extrude and extrude again. So you can see that starting off with a sphere got me the shape a lot quicker than what I'm doing now. Um, I know that when I first started learning sculpting, we typically started off, using a cube, just because they wanted to show that you can go from a fairly prismatic shape into something that was very smooth. So, to learn that, we started off using cubes for most of the things that we created. But you can really start to even round this out pretty quickly. And I'll show that here in a second. And of course, it may benefit you in the beginning to use the orthographic views to go into your top view, like here, right view, for example, so that you know exactly how you're lining up to your drawing. But as you get more familiar with using this tool and seeing what you're modeling in space, you can kind of just always work in this isometric view. Okay, so you can see what I have here. It's not very rounded yet, and I have to go in here and start to modify these shapes a little bit. Maybe I add another subdivision here to add more geometry. And now that I did that, you can see I can grab these vertices, just box select them, move those out, start to match that drawing in that top view, right? Same here. Like that. Add more geometry here. And what's nice is I can grab the whole edge loop. If I select one line, hold shift and hover over that same line, I can get the whole loop. And then now if I go in my top view, let me right click, reposition, and then translate up and then over, right? Yeah. So then to round this off, and of course, let me go back here to the front, I would just take these points and start to shape this. Okay, and then I want to round it off, so I'm going to grab, hold shift and grab my edge chain, and I'm going to bring this down like that, and I'm going to bring this point back up, and this whole edge back. And rotate it, pull it back down. Okay, And again, I could also come in here again and subdivide this, split it, and then I want to raise this portion up to round out that shape. So I'll select these edges and move that up to start rounding that out. All right. So depending on your skill level, you know, somebody that has a lot of experience with this kind of tool could probably start off with a box, right? To, you know, start creating this. But for somebody that is kind of new, you want to start off with a shape probably that's similar to the shape of the object that you're creating. So, you know, if a sphere is similar in shape, which it kind of was in this case, to the curvature of the jet, you know, then we would start off with that sphere, so that as you're sculpting, you know, you get something closer, right? And then same thing here, you know, I can start to manipulate this more. If I'm going to round out the side even, I can grab that edge, split it, and then I can select this edge chain like that and see how that starts to round out. So it was here before, and I subdivided it and grabbed that edge, started to round that out. And we can always bring the nose back in like that. And then same thing with the wings. I can select the faces where the wing's going to start and then extrude those. I'm going to pull this. This guy kind of got left behind there, so I'm going to pull him forward a little bit. And so did that point back here. Okay. But the idea is you want to keep all this stuff as clean as possible. And also the easier way to kind of see how clean your mesh is and to actually modify your mesh, because as your mesh becomes more intricate and there's more polygons, when you're making an adjustment, it might be slower. But up here to the right, you can see that we have box mode. If I select that, it's going to go into this prismatic box mode, and it's easier for me now to go in here, for example, into one of my views, and then try to create a nice smooth or nice topology with my vertices. So I'm going to take that. You can also translate, for example, along an edge. So right now I selected a vertice and I'm translating in that Z direction. If I wanted to translate along the edge direction, I could right click and say relocate. Relocate then allows me to select the edge that I want to use as a reference for my direction. And then now when I translate that vertice, it translates along that edge direction. And that really helps when you're trying to clean up your mesh. There we go. Relocate along an edge, translate, relocate. See, that's a lot nicer. See how like the vertices are now in a vertical line and pretty close to being lined up. We can tweak a little bit more. And it starts to get wonky here in the backside, right? So this is not good topology, so we want to change this, right? So we go in here in our right view, for example, and modify this. Maybe I'm going to bring this up a bit, but then I'm also going to make sure that this stuff is aligned. So let's move that over like that. Okay. And that may be too severe of a fall off here. So for example, we have a nice even spacing between this line and this line, this line and this line here and here, but it starts to taper more here in this area. So I'd want to fix that probably. So I'd take that point, for example, relocate, and then I start to clean this up so it's kind of uniform. So the geometry is uniform and clean. That looks better. And then same thing here. Yep, that's a lot better. Okay, this is going to want to drop down. That's too high, so I'll take these points and make sure that the topology is nice and matching the flow lines here, or the mesh line, sorry. And then same thing here as well. Drop that down a bit. Okay. Go back to our smooth mode, right? And that's pretty good. And then same thing here for the wing. If you want to get that started, again, I can select an edge, subdivide. I can grab a face and extrude it, drag it, rotate it. Okay. So we saw this, starting with a sphere. We saw box mode here with a cube. And there's also, starting off with a plane. I can use a plane as well, rotate that plane, drag it up to where I want to get started. And if you want to select the whole mesh, an easy way to do that is either box selecting here or just grab the shape in the freestyle tree. Move these over. Subdivide, split it. And in a similar way, I can start to now start sculpting with my plane. And this is another common way to start as well. Let's split here, then move that up. This helps me to start getting the curvature of the plane there as well. Drop this down. Subdivide. Pull that up. Maybe we'll split it here. And pull that up a bit. So that starts to take shape, right? And then I can start to, pull in these points, for example. Start to match the shape. And then I can subdivide, right, and start to drop this side down, right? It starts to round off that way as well, right? So there's multiple ways to get started. I can pull this in like that. Okay. So some key things that we took a look at here. Let me just show the first one, right? Is that you have to start off with primitives. They can be open primitive shapes, circles and triangles and squares, or spheres, cylinders, torus, and cubes. You're pushing and pulling, whether it's a vertice, an edge, or a face. You can mirror your mesh so that you only have to model one side. Right now you can see that I have a mirror selected. If at any point, in the future, for example, I want to turn that mirror off and break that dependency, I can deselect dependent and break that association. There's also sculpting tools within Freestyle through the brush. So with the brush, if my mesh was higher res and I had more polygons, I could use these tools to, just like I would use a brush, hover over the mesh and left click and run my mouse along the surface to either inflate areas or flatten areas, smooth out areas. So that tool is powerful as well. But you can see how quickly, we got started with this. So I'm actually going to click on cancel now that I showed you sculpting in Freestyle, because I don't want to save my changes. All right, and I want to talk a little bit more about the design exploration extension. So what's cool about that is not only can I view the different checkpoints, but I can also branch out. So if I activate checkpoint 22, for example, if this is an iteration or this is a version of the jet that I want to explore more, I can start making changes and branch off of checkpoint 22. So for example, if I'm like, hey, I like this version, I want to explore this more. Maybe I want a little bit of an indentation here at the rear of the jet. I can go into Freestyle. Maybe I'll select some of these faces here. And I'll do a split. And I'll add that cut feature in the mesh or the indentation. Click OK. All right, so now you can see it's there, and what I can do is I can save it as another checkpoint branching out from the checkpoint 22. And to do that, I'll just right click and say add new checkpoint, and I'll call this, I don't know, let's do 22B or something. Click OK. All right, and now you can see that I have checkpoint 22B below checkpoint 22, and here's a little arrow next to it. So you can see I've started this branch, and I can explore this branch as long as I want to. And that goes for any one of these. If there's a different version of the jet, maybe it's checkpoint 10, I can activate that one and start a whole new branch exploring that design. So that's pretty powerful. So just to see how powerful that live link between Keyshot and Creo is as well, we've added this change. And if we go back to Keyshot, we can see that we don't have that indentation here. But if I go back here to Creo and I go to my Keyshot tab, I can go select the part, click on update. And if I switch back to Keyshot quickly, you can see it's receiving the information from Creo. And there it is. It just added that to the back. So this is how quickly, using Freestyle, you can make changes to explore your design. One other thing to mention too is that you can run simulations with your Freestyle mesh. Okay, so let's take a look at Simulate Live. So we have our enclosure set up. We also have the boundary conditions like the flow velocity and the outlet pressure specified. So let's go ahead and click the Simulate button. Okay, so notice that we have this plane here, and I can select the fluid object plane, and I can move it over the length of the aircraft and see the areas of high velocity and low velocity. So the higher velocity areas are the warm areas, and the lower velocity areas are the blue areas. I can also change from velocity to pressure in the key, and in the same way move that plane along the aircraft and see the areas where there's high pressure and areas where there's low pressure. I'll switch back to velocity. I can even rotate the plane so I can see the velocity in the Z direction, just like that. That's pretty neat. I can also use vectors, for example, to see the flow lines go over the top of the plane, like that. And I can also look at it from the front view as well, or an isometric view like this. I can change the vectors with the vector options, and I can increase the count to see more flow lines. I can increase or decrease the tail length like that as well, and then increase the count again maybe. So whatever options you feel like you need to adjust to improve the visibility relative to what's going on, you can adjust in the options window. And then I can also do the same for streamlines. So let's deselect the vectors button and turn on streamlines, and there's the streamlines, and in the same way I can use the options to adjust the count. For example, drop that down. I can increase the width. Look at that, that's a nice view. So now I can see those streamlines a lot better, and that's amazing. Let's zoom in here. So that really helps us to visualize what's going on with the aircraft there. I can also adjust the inlet for the air as it's coming over the plane and even across the wings. Let me expand this to cover the wings fully. I'll bring this back down a bit. And then zoom in. Go in the side view. The top view again. So in theory, this would be a great way in the early development of the aircraft to test the aerodynamics, where there's areas of high pressure and low pressure. And then you could always go back to the freestyle mesh, and you can update the mesh, make changes to it, and see the results of the changes when you bring that back in again to Creo Simulate Live. So CSL is great for the early concept development stage, but you would probably want to use a more accurate simulation package to get your final simulation results in your analysis. But just want to make sure that you guys can see that you can indeed use that freestyle mesh, make sure it's watertight, and then try to solidify it, and then you can use that to get your results in your simulations. Also, this design exploration extension isn't just for freestyle. It's also for anything that you're modeling in Creo. So it could be normal parametric feature-based stuff that you're doing. It could be assembly mode. So you can see here that I've already got this assembly started. So I'm starting the ISDX version of this jet, which I'll show in the next webinar. I've started that, and you can see I've got my skeleton model laid out. I've got my parts that I'm going to bring this geometry into to actually create the solid components. And I also have the skeleton model open up here separately, right? So, but what's nice about this, I'm going to show in the next video, is I can use the freestyle mesh as a reference for snapping my curves too. So if you notice, I have these copy geometry features here. These copy geometry features are straight from the freestyle mesh. And to do that, I went to model intent, publish geometry, and I selected the surfaces. You can see they show up here in the footer actually. I selected the surfaces of the jet that I wanted to publish so that I could easily bring those into the skeleton model. So I publish those, and if I select the first published geometry feature right here, it's going to show you the quilt that I selected. And I also have a second one right here for that canopy. See that canopy here? So these are the two main surfaces I wanted to bring into the skeleton model. And if I go back to the assembly and I go back to the skeleton model, it's open here, you can see that I then copied those in. So there's the copy geometry feature, it's external, and I brought that in, and then I use that to actually start creating the curves with the ISDX surfacing tool. Okay, so hope you guys enjoyed this video, presentation, sorry. If you have any questions, right, you can just comment in the chat. Okay, I also have some polls that you guys can answer, so let me start that. So the first poll question is going to be, have you ever used Freestyle before? So I'll launch that poll, and let's see what you guys say here. Okay, so far we have 5 people that haven't used it and 1 person that has. And the next poll question is, have you used the design exploration? 4 people, about it's split in half. So we have 3 people that have used it and 3 that haven't. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I'm hoping that you guys learned a lot today about Freestyle, especially the power that it gives you in creating high quality surfaces quickly. I also hope that you saw the benefits of the design exploration extension when it comes to be able to save multiple checkpoints and versions of a design within one part file, and the ability to quickly branch off one of the checkpoints to explore that design and all that stuff. So thank you for joining, and looking forward to see you guys in the next one. Thanks.